everyone. We're going to give everybody just a few minutes here to get joined. I know people have busy lives, especially pastors and church workers. So we're so glad that you all are here today. We've got a couple of handfuls of people on the call so far, on the event so far, and we're going to get started in just a minute or so. But just to let you all know who are already here, the participants that are in the event, that we are going to go ahead and give you guys options to interact with us today. And so we want you to be able to find these ways to interact with us. So I'm going to kind of take us through some ground, maybe not ground rules. That's not the right way to say it, but just a little tour of Zoom here. You're probably all very familiar with Zoom. But the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and then should be able to see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen as well. And so the difference is there. If you don't mind people seeing your name to make the comments, then go ahead and drop it in the chat, and we'll pick up on those questions. We'll answer them as in real time. And then if we don't get to it in real time, we'll answer it at the end, but we'll get to your questions. If you want to use the Q&A feature, then I won't tell everybody your name. How about that? And I'll keep it anonymous, and we'll just ask the question to the group here today so we get their questions answered. So those are two ways you can interact with us. We want this to be a good discussion today. We want this to be a conversation. And we're here at the BMA Global Studios in the podcast room. So we're set up for discussion. And our guests here today are going to join us in just a second to do that. But I also want to call your attention to the resources button at the bottom of your screen. There we have the presentation for today. You can download it directly. And we'll also make it available on our website. And of course, the recording of this webinar will be available too. It's going to be sent to you shortly after the event. So you'll have that as well. So you don't have to feverishly take notes, but take the notes that you want for sure. And there'll be plenty of noteworthy things. So be ready for that to take notes. So I'm going to introduce to you our guests that we have in the room for the event. And the first one's not really a guest. He's our executive director, Dr. Steve Crawley. So welcome, Steve, to the event today.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, and we're going to we're not going to show our guests just yet, even though everybody knows if they're reading our emails about our new guests. But I want you to introduce our guests here in just a second. But you all know we're talking about bookkeeping today, and so and what that's going to mean to our churches. But Steve, I want you to tell our audience a couple of different things. Number one, why did we decide to bring on a bookkeeping partner? And then why the partner that we did bring on? And I'm gonna let you reveal her identity in just a second. But so why don't you just kind of break the ice and just kind of introduce why we're here?
Yeah, well, we often express the fact that Jesus had a lot to say about money in the New Testament. And I think there's a direct correlation between the way we manage money and our spiritual lives. And
right.
In the kingdom of God, one of the things that we want to do is not just set a standard, but really we should, as Christ followers, exaggerate that standard. And so one of the reasons that we wanted to have this type of initiative through BMA Financial is, you hear us say all the time, our mantra is essentially to manage God's resources God's way for God's glory.
Right.
And so when it comes to managing God's resources God's way, certainly we want to do that personally in our individual lives. But also we want to be a resource for churches in regard to that too. So this effort to provide bookkeeping / accounting services is something that really aligns with our mission of managing God's resources His way. And again, as Christ followers, we want to be exemplary in the way that we do that. Here recently, you may have seen a YouTube video series actually on a well-known pastor in a well-known church in our nation that is going through some really turbulent times. I think there are a lot of leadership lessons to learn from what I've observed in that, and also some financial lessons. And I'm certainly not judging the actions of the individual, nor am I arguing for or against the documentary. And I'm being vague on purpose because I just want to make a point about that. But one thing that became crystal clear to me as I watched that documentary was the importance of having good accounting and good systems in our churches. Systems that present the financial statements really with clarity and transparency so that people understand how the Lord's resources are being used and managed within his church.
Right.
I don't think that we can overemphasize the importance of that. So seeing an income statement and a balance sheet and a cash flow statement and understanding the capital spending and all of these things sound mundane and even boring maybe to some, but how important it is that as Christ followers, again, we set a good example in the way that we manage these things. And that's something that we've actually tried to do through our reporting at the BMA National Meeting each year is provide that level of transparency for that reason, that we want to be above reproach in the way that we manage his money.
Yeah.
Another important takeaway for me in that, as I alluded to, was the value of transparency in what we show, so that the person in the congregation has complete trust that the money that they are donating, which we know is all the Lord's, is being used as intended and is fully accountable. I think the challenge for a lot of churches with regard to that, though, is there may not be human resources within the congregation that can help with that. And that is why we are thrilled that we are able to partner with Sparrow Team Financials, and specifically with Caroline Sellers. And it's great to have her as part of our webinar today. And she's going to be doing a series of webinars on this discipline that I think will be a tremendous blessing to you. But Caroline is part of us. She is in a BMA church right now. She's a part of Antioch Conway. Her husband, Travis, is the worship pastor at Antioch Conway. And they're actually in the process of planning a church down in Salina, Texas, which is really exciting. So kind of set the table there, Caroline, if you will. As I turn it over to you, please share with us a little bit about what compelled you to start Sparrow Team Financials and what you think about this partnership that we forged between BMA Financial and your company.
Thank you so much for having me here today. And one of the reasons why that we started Sparrow Team Financials is I had some friends ask me to help them with their bookkeeping. And at the time, I was a full-time accountant at another church. And so I started helping with their bookkeeping. And then I just got another client from that, another client before I knew it. It was just time for me to go out on my own and do this. But Sparrow Team Financials, we're just a team of people who really exist really to help ministry leaders just get a good night's sleep. And we do that through accounting and bookkeeping for church. You know, those numbers, they really mean something to us. Those are people behind the numbers who are giving their gifts and their offerings to the Lord. And it's so important, like you said, that we make sure that every penny is accounted for and that we're being good stewards with that money. And so that really means something to me. So being part of a ministry team at a church is so important. Because I know that everything I'm doing is supporting the Lord's work in that area and in that community. And so that's why we have Sparrow Team Financials.
That's great. Well, with that, why don't you just kick off the webinar today and take us through the topic at hand.
Okay. Well, today we're going to touch on that topic of internal controls. And I say touch because it's such a complex topic and there's so many pieces involved. So we're going to just highlight a few things today. But if we get to the end of this webinar and you're thinking, I need more help with this, this was not enough information, I have more questions, you can always reach out to us on sparrowteamfinancials.com and you can get a free consultation. We've got a 15-point checklist prepared and ready to give to whoever wants more information to help their team get started with these financial controls. So there's more information out there available to you after today. So I guess we can start with that first slide and just kind of let everybody know, here's what we're going to talk about today. First of all, I want to talk about what I call the triangle method. If we can think geometry, whenever we're looking at financial processes, it's very easy to think about a triangle. You want to put a triangle framework around each process that will keep it secure. We're going to talk more about that. We're going to talk about making sure that we have effective duty segregation so that no one person is over a financial process from beginning to end. We also want to make sure we've talked about offerings and donations and what are the procedures that need to be in place in order to authorize expenses. And then we're going to wrap up with what can a financial committee do in those meetings when they're presented with reports. Now what? Now, how do we know what we're looking at is good? And what questions do we need to ask? We're going to talk about that, give them some tips of how they can really utilize those meetings to get those answers. So let's just dive in. We'll just dive in here and start talking about these things. Let's start with the triangle method. What is the triangle method? When we create internal controls, you need three things. First of all, you need a separation of duties, transparency and accountability, and checks and balances. And when you surround each process with the triangle, then you do that. And it ensures that no one person has control over the entire process. Each step is performed by a different person, and that provides oversight, and it really reduces the risk of fraud and also error. And then at the end, you're making sure that each part of the process is reviewed so that it's authorized before it's finalized. So if we could look at, okay, what's a real life example of that? How could we use the triangle idea to secure a process? Well, let's pretend like we're in a perfect church. And at this perfect church, they have written out all of
There's perfect churches.
Written out all their financial policies, and there's one in place for reimbursements. And let's say at this perfect church, there's this perfect youth minister, and he's read the policies and he's been communicated with, and he knows exactly what to do. And so a parent comes to him. They purchased pizza for Wednesday night youth group, and now they want to be reimbursed. Well, what happens next? Let's think about how we're going to make that a secure process. Well, first of all, maybe he's going to know that there's a check request form, and he's going to go get the request form, put all the information on it, and attach that original receipt. So that's step one. We're initiating this process. How are we going to get the check? He does that. And then he turns it into the accountant, and the accountant is going to look at that receipt, look at the budget item, and is going to know what those processes are from the finance committee. If there's a limit that they've said, no transaction can exceed $100 without extra approval. Well, is this under $100? Maybe it is. It's $50. So the accountant says, okay, I can write this check. Everything's in place. So they create the check. Now the accountant doesn't need to sign the check. We need that last piece of the triangle. So there needs to be a separate check signing committee where the accountant calls in the committee. They review the documents. They see the form the ministry leader has signed. There's the original receipt. The accountant has created the check. It matches the receipt. Everything looks good. So then they give their final approval and sign that check. So that is a way, just one example of how we could take the idea of that triangle, take that activity that needs to happen financially, break it into three pieces so that we have all of that oversight. So when you're designing processes, think through anything with a number sign, you need to separate the duties so that no one person has control. Be clear with a written procedure, and then remember the number 3, because that's super important throughout all of these. And I think we should move on and talk more about segregation of duties, because that's really the central point of this triangle process. So
along with that, Caroline, I read last week, this was in a Catholic diocese, but there was an individual that was indicted and embezzled $875,000 over a number of years in a church financial position. With the triangle and the segregation of duties, as you just described, that would be very difficult in that one person could not pull that off by him or herself, correct?
Exactly. As a matter of fact, and I told Ryan I would tell some church horror stories.
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
That's one of those that we could add to that. Of course, everything I'm going to share today, I've had a personal experience with. either working with the church who's been through something difficult like that. And of course, I'm not going to share names
Sure.
to keep confidentiality, but that is exactly the point of this triangle method. One of the churches I was working with had a preschool within the church, and it was they had separated it out. It had its own EIN, but it was still a ministry of the church. It kind of became its own entity there. So there was a board that was formed to actually oversee this preschool. And so you would think, oh, that's all you need. You just need a board, right?
Yeah.
But there wasn't oversight with that board. And what ended up happening is the director of that preschool, over a period of time, several years, was able to use the credit card inappropriately and buy things for their personal expenses, those expensive handbags,
Wow.
all kinds of things, and disguise them as legit charges. And so the church ended up having to hire someone to do a forensic audit, really, just to see what the damage really happened. And it was a significant amount over time. And so what could have happened in that circumstance if there would have been a triangle framework around that? Well, you would have segmented out those duties. What they had was a director who was making all of the purchases, doing all the reconciliations, all the reporting, was the one answering the questions to the board. It was just one person. And so what they could have done, and what they should have done, is to separate that out. Maybe the director was the one making the purchases, but then there's a bookkeeper, accountant, who's doing the reconciliations and receiving the receipts, and then a treasurer appointed on the board who then is going to do transaction testing and evaluate those reports. And then they needed a really active board that would really drill down in those reports and ask questions. So why do we do that? Is it that we don't trust people? It's not that. It's that, like you said earlier, when we receive money, that is a gift. It doesn't belong to us. It's the Lord's money that is being used for that ministry. So we have these safeguards in place for that reason. But also, as ministry leaders, we have to protect the people who are involved in our ministries, our volunteers, our staff. And what are we protecting them from? We're protecting them from the enemy. When someone is, given an opportunity and they've got circumstances in their life, you don't want the failure of a process to, put them in some type of danger where they could be tempted to do something like that by the enemy. We need those hedges of protection because we love our people. And when we remove the opportunity, that's just being responsible church leaders.
Like
that's why these are so important.
The old saying, power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And to your point, having these processes in place not only is good stewardship and exaggerates that standard like we talked about before, but it does protect the people in positions of authority, which I think is obviously paramount to the processes that we establish. Now, some might argue that just seems like an overkill. Look, we're a country church. We've got a treasurer who is also, he's running a welding service, and we just can't do these type things. Well, what would you say to that? Because I still think that regardless of the size of our churches and regardless of the situation that we might be in, which obviously in the BMA, let's just be honest, we have a lot of rural churches, and I can empathize with these individuals. But how would we go about that in a small church setting where, look, we don't have a staff and a financial secretary and someone that can handle these various things? What are some maybe creative ways we could get around that in a small church setting, would you say?
Well, one way is to utilize a lot of the online tools that we have now, because sometimes one side of that triangle can be that you have a process kind of like, well, let me give you an example. Like right now, paper checks are just one of the most vulnerable ways to conduct business right now. Bad people have figured out all kinds of ways to manipulate paper checks. When you write one and you put it in the mail or you send it out, you put it in the wild, you have no idea what's going to happen to your paper check. So one thing that you can do is use our new tools and technology to make your payment processes more secure. There's a lot of things on that 15-point checklist that gives people ideas. Hey, here's some ways that you can shore up this. So if you don't have the manpower, but 3 people is not a difficult number. If you can find 3 different unrelated people that care about the finances as a ministry at the church, you can do these types of financial controls. The triangle is not hard. It's 3.
Right. It's not hard. It's different, but it's not hard. And so that's something that really any of our churches could do with intentionality.
Right.
And some may say, that just still sounds like it's so cumbersome. Well, here's the thing. If our people begin to doubt the way that money is being managed or tracked, that could affect giving, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
And so one way that we can serve our people to be good stewards and to motivate them to want to give even more is by establishing processes within the church's accounting system that would promote transparency, accountability, and give them a good level of comfort that, hey, I'm willing to make sacrifices to invest in this particular body of Christ with the resources I've been given, right?
Right. Yes. One of those processes that happens every week is giving contributions, the offering plate. And I think we could look at that next slide that has some information about that. It happens every week. And so that process needs to probably, it's one of the ways we can start. If you've never done this before, this is one of the things you can do. You can ask yourself some questions when you're thinking about taking in the money from donors and from givers with their tithes and offerings. Are multiple unrelated people responsible for counting the money after services? We don't want husbands and wives and related people. That's one way we can say, okay, we're going to really secure this process and make sure these are unrelated folks. Are offerings promptly recorded and deposited? Is there a procedure where we say we're depositing it today, it's going in the drop box at the bank? Do they have an overnight bank box? Or maybe there's someone who comes every Monday morning and takes it to the bank. So we need to know when that money is being put in the bank. And then last, we need to know, how are we going to secure the cash between that time, between the counting time and the drop off at the bank? There needs to be a secure place for that cash to go. One more crazy story about this situation. I was working with a church who had a financial secretary who had retired, and she'd been there for years and years and years. And when you went into her office, there were stacks and stacks of papers, probably every piece of paper that had come in the office since the doors opened up the church was in this office. Drawers and cabinets, everything stuffed just to the top. And so they started going through all of the things in the office to figure out what's in here. What is all of this? And as they opened drawers and cabinets, they began to find little stacks of checks. And what had happened over time is like, the offering would get collected, the checks would be given to her, and she would put them somewhere, stuff them, to keep them safe. And then she'd forget that they were there. And so they
my goodness.
And so they started finding all of these extra checks just hanging around in that office.
Wow.
So if your members, if that's happening, your checks aren't getting cashed, they're going to lose faith, like you talked about. And do we have processes that are really protecting that money? And we want to use that money for the kingdom of God. We don't want it to be stuffed in a drawer. So what could they have done in that moment or before that moment to have a triangle of a framework around the collection of the money? Well, it's pretty simple. It's not as hard as people think. First of all, the money should be collected and then dropped in a safe. You need a safe at your church. You need to drop that money there. And then there needs to be a couple of people, 2 or 3 people who are the designated, we're the money counters of the church. They get nominated to be the money counters. And they need to have a certain time that they're coming and they're going to get the money out of the safe. 3 unrelated people, they're going to count this money. 1 is going to take it to the bank. There's probably some kind of form there that they're signing. Here's the money we counted, and they all are signing it. We agree. And here's the person who's taking it to the bank. And then that form needs to be given to your bookkeeper accountant so that when they're watching the bank account, they want to see that deposit has come through exactly as it has been counted. So you have this 1, 2, 3. It's not a hard process to do. It'll work like clockwork once you get it set up. But that's what people need to feel secure. They need to know that you have an intentional process to get that money in the bank so it can be used for ministry.
That's good.
Well, another thought along those lines, Caroline, is as we seek to see more people involved in the work of the church within a congregation, some are gifted administratively, some financially, just a lot of diverse gifts that New Testament speaks of. But as it pertains to what we're talking about today, it gives a number of people an opportunity to use those gifts in concert with each other within the church, which just helps carry that load and also gives them a place to serve, right? So even in small churches, there will be a number of people gifted in this area that could participate in the type activity that we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah, my dad set that example
Mhm.
for me.
Mhm.
He was a money counter at the church for years and years and years. And at his church, it was kind of a larger church, so they wanted to count the money as it came in during Sunday school
Yeah.
time because people would want to give during Sunday school. And so they had a room that was the money counter room.
Mm.
And they would sit around the table and they would have a devotional. It was almost like a Sunday
Oh,
school.
wow.
And then as soon as they finished, the money would start coming in and they would start to count. It was such a beautiful thing to see. My dad was not a musician. He wasn't a preacher. He didn't have gifts in that way, but he could count money.
Yeah.
And so that is how he served his
Yeah,
church
to
for
do that.
years and years.
That's a great point because there's so many people that don't have that ability to teach or preach or sing or play, but there is something in the church for them to do, and that's such a great opportunity. I wanted to make sure that our audience, if you didn't hear and you have questions, put them in the chat or the Q&A. I'm monitoring those now. So if you have any questions for Miss Carolina, she's talking here. We're getting through this, but we want to make sure if you have questions that you're able to answer those on. So I'm looking at this, so I just want to remind everybody on that. So go ahead and please continue. This is good stuff.
Talked about taking in the money. So let's talk about spending the money. How
Yeah.
are we going to use?
Now we're talking.
And how are we going to make sure that when we have expenditures of the church, that we've done it in a way, like you were talking about earlier, with transparency and being accountable for those things? It's so important. And so there's some questions that we can ask ourselves as we're thinking through our process that we have at our church. Are there written procedures in place so that everybody has the communication and they know how to ask for a reimbursement check, or they need to turn in a receipt? How do they do that? And then those procedures being communicated in that way so that it always is consistent.
Yeah.
That's one of the main things.
Yeah.
And there are different kinds of expenses. There's recurring bills, one-time payments, payments by check. So you need a process for each kind because it's going to be a little bit different for each one.
I am curious. So on some of that process there, how much software are you using for this, or are you using software, or is it just manual processes, just to give our folks an idea?
And it also depends on how your church accounting and bookkeeping is set up.
Okay.
I think it is a mix because you have a human element. So someone's going to have to give you some type of piece of paper,
Right.
or
Sure.
it's a snap of a receipt.
Yeah, picture.
There are apps where you can actually snap receipts and email them. That's a great way to lessen the stacks of paper and make sure receipt doesn't get lost.
Yeah.
So there can be a mix of things, but it depends on the process.
Yeah.
Something else they should add is the finance committee or leadership approval needed for purchases that are large. So there probably needs to be a limit in place where they say a transaction that is this amount or greater really needs an extra level of approval. Even if a minister on staff said it was okay, we still need to go to the committee with those things. And then if there's contracts, a lot of times it happens, copier contract, phones contracts, anything with a contract, that always needs to go to the finance committee for oversight, especially if it's going to commit the church for a certain period of time. So those are the things we need to think about when we're setting these processes in place for doing expenses. So how would that work with the triangle method? That's been our question all the time. We could take recurring bills. That happens a lot. Utilities, insurance, a lot of the basic operational type things. My suggestion would be the first side of this triangle is that the finance committee has a list. They see these are all the recurring operational charges that happen every month, and they approve that list for the bookkeeper to pay because they're just like clockwork every month. And then, of course, there's a limit. So they say in their policy, if it exceeds this by the certain amount, then we need to stop and let the committee know, oh, the electric bill was twice as much this month. Those kinds of things so they can deal with those operational problems that come up. And then you have the bookkeeper paying. And of course, I've already said paper checks are not my favorite thing. I have a horror story about that I can share with you. But they can use online portals, direct deposit. There's all kinds of ways to pay bills now that is way more secure than a paper check. And then the treasurer needs to be involved. They need to be looking at a printed report from the bookkeeper. Says, here's all the bills that were paid. And then they need to transaction test that to the bank to make sure that that money really went to what it was intended to go to. So that's one way with recurring bills. We could talk about a lot of things, credit cards, payroll, all kinds of things that we could really make expenses more secure with a triangle.
Nice.
And
That's great.
a thought that came to mind there, Caroline, and we'll cover this, I know, in another webinar, but it's a reminder of the importance of a good budget.
Yes.
Because a good budget then it's not only a forecast of your expenses, but it becomes a tool for checks and balances. Because if you have a trend analysis of an account, let's say utilities, you pretty much can nail those costs down if you've got 3 or 4 year history. And if you're budgeting correctly and by month, then your budget suddenly becomes a tool. And when there's an aberration to the budget, suddenly, if you've done a good job with that budget, there's a highlight on a variance, right? And that's a red flag to the treasurer, to the finance committee. Okay, something abnormal has gone on here, and we may need to drill down and figure out what's going on.
Exactly. I'm so glad you said that because that is exactly what I'm going to talk about on the next slide.
Forgive me.
Great segue.
We really didn't plan that. Sorry, I got ahead of the process there.
Exactly right. That is why we do this, so that our ministry team, our finance team, the committee has the tools they need to make those decisions. That is exactly the reason why. So if we were going to talk more about that, which is what I'd like to do, we would ask ourselves the same question you did. Is there an annual budget that is approved by the finance committee, first of all? And is it based on actual numbers? Are we looking at what were expenses last year, the year before, all the trends that you're talking about? And our giving, is our budget based on the giving patterns that we've had? So they can put a budget together that speaks to those actual numbers. And then after that, the next question is, are financial reports comparing the budget and the actual expenses presented and evaluated every month? And that answer to that question needs to be yes. So how do they do that? I guess that's the next thing I want to talk about. You mentioned earlier some of those essential reports, and that's the statement of financial position, which is like your balance sheet, your income statement, and then also your operating cash. Those are the top 3, the most essential. There are lots of other reports that could be provided, but those are the bottom line important ones, the essential ones. So once they've received these reports, well, now what? What do we do with these reports? There's all of this information on it. How do we know what we're looking at is how do we know if it's in good shape? How do we know if we need to make decisions? And so I put a few ideas together just to help them start at a starting place if they've never done that before. One thing they need to do is compare percentages to the current budget. So ask your accountant or your bookkeeper to put the percentages on the reports for you so that you can see what percentage of the budget has been used. Right then, you'll be able to tell, are we over budget or under budget? If it's June and you have a calendar year budget, your expenses should be right about 15%, right? So if you're at 80%, that's a big red flag right there. Hey, something's going on in that account. We need to ask questions to find out what's happening. And then another thing they should do is compare their actual amounts to last year. Like you were talking about, we need to know the trends. What happened this month, last year, and even the year before, so we can see if anything is off about the numbers that you're being presented that month. And then there's some magic numbers that the committee should know. And those are percentages. You should know a magic percentage over budget that would trigger a drill down, as you were talking about, on a specific account. And here's what I mean by that. Maybe your committee has decided anything that is 20% or more over budget is going to trigger a drill down session. So that would mean, like, what if you had a gas expense line and it's $1,000 a month for this gas expense, and you get the reports and it's $1,200. Okay, it's 20% over. That should trigger your committee. You should be looking down the list and saying, oh, this one's 20% over. We need to see all the transactions that happened in that account this month. Why is it over? Well, if the accountant knows anything 20% or over, they're going to want to see the receipts. They can have those things prepared and ready for that meeting. And maybe it's something as simple as the senior adults took an extra trip this month that wasn't planned. And so we had extra gas expense, or maybe it's something different. And so and a decision needs to be made, but how would you know? You wouldn't know that you needed to make decisions unless you had this magic number to identify those accounts that needed your attention. So the second thing that they could do is have another magic number, which is a percentage over budget for expenses or under budget for giving, that will trigger a stop, drop, and roll event. We need to stop, drop, and roll. So maybe it's 20% and giving is 20% down this month. Stop, drop, and roll. We need to decide and find out right now what's happening with our giving. Why is it down? Or is our expense accounts, are they over 20%? Stop, drop, and roll. That means we've got to really dig in and figure out what's going on. In that situation, maybe it's the summer and people just haven't been at church. You know, they've been on vacations, and when people aren't there, they don't give as much. So maybe when they drill down and they stop, drop, and roll, and they realize, oh, what we need to do is send out an email. We need to remind everybody all of the wonderful ministries that are going on this summer. And if they haven't, been at church, we've missed them. Here's the link to give if you hadn't had a chance to give, so we can keep doing our ministries. Maybe it's something simple like that. I had a situation with the church that was having trouble during a period of time with their giving. And the solution became that the people needed to be reminded of how much that they had given through the year. And so when we started sending out quarterly statements, giving instantly increased because it reminded them quarterly of how much they had given in their tithes. So instead of waiting till the end of the year and doing catch up, we were able to remind them through the year, and that changed everything.
I just got to share this after you said that. So when I did my dissertation with graduate work, it was in the area of stewardship, and one of the things that we looked at were different factors that cause giving to increase in a local church. And we found a statistically significant difference in churches that sent contribution statements quarterly than those who sent contribution statements annually. Churches that did it quarterly had higher per capita giving than other churches. So
that was
just decided, so that validates the research.
Absolutely.
Just awareness goes a long ways, doesn't it? When people know what's going on, how is this to work? And it's no mystery why God wants us to be able to give generously, to the Lord's work. And that people just, I think, miss that correlation of our tithes and offerings are going to support the work of what we're doing at the local church.
I have found, just in my experience, that organizations and churches included that manage their finances well have higher giving, per capita giving. And I just think there's a direct correlation. I think God blesses that process. He blesses stewardship. I mean, why would he give more resources to a church body that's not managing the resources they have well? And you could see why some of the things that we're talking about here today, if your church were to set that up, I think it positions your church to receive more blessings from God because they're going to be handled wisely and judiciously. So
That's good.
A direct correlation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And budgets, they're just, it's monopoly money, really. Until it's been given, it's just numbers on a piece of paper. And so if you're a finance committee and you're waiting a really long time, even the end of the year, to really examine, did we meet our budget or not? You're missing all those opportunities through the year to make self-corrections. Like there may be a moment where you say, okay, our giving is down. and maybe it's down 20%. So we need to do some budget cuts right now. We need to do a 20% budget cut to kind of rebalance that budget.
Right.
And maybe times you need to do that, and you can't if you're not examining these in a detailed way as you go through the year.
Yeah.
So
And I think it's really, a lot of people don't want to ask those tough questions. You have to be okay with asking those tough questions, right? And not knowing that we're not going after anybody, but we have to find out. We have to be good stewards, like Steve keeps saying. So we want to make sure we really look at things properly and be okay with the uncomfortable conversations. So how does that play out for you and your clients right now, your churches right now? Is that something you really have to coach, or what does that look like?
Well, we try to use tools so that those uncomfortable conversations it would never be a surprise.
Yeah.
You know, if we're doing a really good job of accounting for every penny as we go, we're not going to be surprised by certain things that happen. For instance, there's a thing that one of my employees, she's just a rock star bookkeeper. She's been doing church accounting for a really, really long time. And she coined this phrase, and she says that every church should have a Noah's fund.
A Noah fund.
A Noah's fund. Just like in the Bible story,
Okay.
For Noah.
Yeah.
And, you know, in real life, the rains do come. And so we need this Noah's fund to pull from when the storms start.
I like it.
So for instance, like if what if the air conditioner goes out and you have this big $10,000 bill because you've got to replace your air conditioner? You don't want to have to say, everyone, we have to cut our ministry budgets because we have to buy this air conditioner.
Yeah.
You want to have prepared ahead of time. One day the air conditioner might go out,
right,
and you've got this Noah's fund that you can quickly recover from the storm, and our youth and children's departments don't have to have their budgets cut to get that air conditioner.
That's good.
So having things in place like that really helps not have to have those hard conversations because you've prepared ahead of time for those things that might come.
That's good.
There's one more important number that we should talk about, and it's the magic number of knowing how many days operating cash do you need to have on hand at all times. The ideal is 1 year of operating cash. And don't laugh.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
But if you haven't started collecting a little cash savings of operating cash, starting with 1 month is a great goal to get started.
Yeah.
So you need to know what that number is if you're starting with 30 days. What is that magic number of the operating cash? And then when you're looking at your balance sheet or your statement of financial position, if that checking account balance dips below that number, that needs to probably trigger a freeze warning, right?
Yeah.
To say, oh, what is happening with our operating cash that we've now dipped into this area? To really drill down in these reports and find out, what did we spend money on? Is it a giving issue? Is it an expense issue? But knowing all of those magic numbers will help you look at the report, identify the areas that you need to drill down and discover and ask questions so that you can move forward with confidence. And that's really what the finance committee needs to be doing. They can also do a couple other things. Like quarterly, you can pick a random account and say, we want to drill down on this account. No reason. We just want to look. You should be doing that. Pick something and dig in there. And then maybe once a quarter, have a couple members on your team do what I call like an AP audit, where they just kind of look, who are all the vendors we've been paying? How much are we paying? You know, one thing I see a lot is that a church will choose a vendor and they'll stick with them for years and years and years and years and years.
Yeah.
Instead of really seeking out, are there more cost-effective alternatives? Like, how can we really use our money well? Could we find something else now that things have changed after a few years that would help free up some more cash in our budget? So you want to continue to search and look at those things and constantly be trimming the fat off of your expenses.
That's good. That's good.
You know, you talk a lot about processes as we've gone through the webinar today, Caroline. And what I like about processes, although it sounds somewhat inflated or cumbersome when you start talking about all these policies, really it's not, because when you establish a process, it's you're answering one question that will answer 1,000 others.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
And so while it might seem like, oh, to set up all these policies and procedures would be a painstaking task, it's really not when you look at the big picture because of what it will do for you going forward. And then I love that mindset of one question answered answers 1,000 more. We get this nailed down, it's in place, and then it kind of runs on auto. Right?
Absolutely. It runs like clockwork.
Yeah.
You start to develop a rhythm, and people want to do the right thing. Nobody, wakes up one morning and thinks, I'm going to steal from the church today. Nobody does that. But having these things in place helps prevent those opportunities. And whenever you get them in place, you develop this clockwork of a system. Everybody falls in line. Like they know, okay,
Yeah.
receipts are due, they're going to be examined, they're going to see this. It becomes part of your church culture almost. And it really sets you up for growth because you need this great foundation before you can grow beyond that. Add staff members, add people, add ministries. This is the foundation of that.
Yeah.
There's an old saying, what you tolerate, you encourage. And you have good policies and there is no toleration of certain things that are extremely important, then it encourages behavior along those lines.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
So great information today.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind just sharing with our churches, if they wanted to explore more about how that they could utilize maybe our partnership with Sparrow team, what would that look like? How would they go about that process with you?
We have a website. It's at sparrowteamfinancials.com, and you can reach out to me there and I can get you some more information. You can also contact BMA Financial, and they can also direct you straight to us. We'd be happy to have a conversation. Advice is free. And so if you just have some questions, I would love to help BMA churches. So please contact me with your questions and I'm here for you.
Yeah.
And then if it's something that I can do to help your church or to do for you, we can talk more about that, what that would look like and what you need. So I think that's what we could do.
Excellent. So I have a good friend in ministry, Brother Chris George, who is the pastor of Round Prairie Church down in Fairfield, Texas. And they're utilizing your services. So I'm sure, Chris, I'm sure you don't mind me sharing this. He could testify of Caroline's expertise and their team. And we hope that that this partnership that we forged between our ministries and Sparrow Team Financials is something that will be a blessing to our churches because I don't think we can overemphasize the importance of good stewardship.
Absolutely.
Great
Absolutely.
to have you with us today.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's been our pleasure. I know it's our folks' pleasure as well. And so you heard the details from Caroline of how to get in touch with her. If when you get the recording, you'll see all the information there again, or you can just go to bmafinancial.org. We've got her website linked up there as well. So just a few housekeeping things. Shortly you'll receive a follow-up email with our survey. We want you to take our Google form survey just really quickly, just a few minutes. Let us know how this was, because we need to know more information. What else could we do? Caroline's going to be giving us a series of webinars, but we want to know the hot topics that you have, the questions that you have, so we can answer those for you. So please take a few minutes to do that. We do look at that information and we make adjustments accordingly. So do that when it comes to you through email. If you have any questions at all about the recording or anything like that, you can reach out to me, Ryan Johnson, at ryan@bmaamerica.org. And you can find me on the website as well, or just send in a contact form on our website. There's a lot of different ways that we'll get your message. So please don't hesitate to give us your feedback. And we thank you for joining us today. We hope that was very helpful. I know it was for us. And I was just at the BMA state meeting in Texas, and I heard a lot of these things that you were talking about, not the horror stories, but just some of the concerns. We've got one treasurer and one pastor and that sort of thing. Then other churches a little bit bigger that, yeah, we need some help and that sort of thing. So we're so glad that Caroline's part of the team, and we know that she'll serve you well in any capacity. So please don't hesitate to reach out to her. So with that, we'll be in touch for the next webinar after the first of the year, and we'll continue to bring this great content to you. So thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time.